Thank you, Kristen, for that introduction, and thank you all so much for being here today. To trace the story of this relatively unknown musician, one must begin in Detroit. This town, which has given birth to so many great jazz figures of enormous prominence, was the very location for the beginning of a career which has been overlooked and underappreciated for the past 45 years. The artist was Julius Watkins. His instrument was the French horn, and his love was jazz. Over the course of his 34-year career, Watkins toured the world, performed on over 100 recordings, played in Broadway shows, and was the founder of 2 unique musical ensembles. He was a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. He was a teacher and a friend. But most importantly, he served as an inspiration to those who heard him play. Credentials such as these would often earn the individual numerous awards and great fame, but this was not the case with Julius Watkins. He was a carefree man with a free and easy outlook on life, and his personality mirrored the same qualities which have drawn audiences to the instrument on which he performed. He was calm, peaceful, and full of warmth. He once said, "We are a special group of people. We don't choose the horn chooses us." And as rewarding and significant as Watkins' career became, it had an unsuspecting start in an unassuming place. The horn did choose him, and it happened in the Motor City. Julius Burton Watkins was born on October 10th, 1921, and was the second of 4 children. His father, Lucius, was originally from Illinois and worked in Detroit as an electrician. His mother, Mattie, was a Georgia native and was a busy housewife in the Watkins home. They lived in this large 3-story house located at 6037 Scotton Avenue on the west side of Detroit. The neighborhood was and still is dominated by blue-collar citizens with strong family networks. By 1930, the Watkins house was bursting at the seams. Lucius and Mattie resided with their 4 children, Lucius Jr., Julius, Olivia, and Janice, along with a number of boarders who rented out rooms in the Watkins home. Julius was 9 years old when the horn lured him away from the saxophones, trumpets, and drums of his elementary school band. These instruments were significantly more popular than the horn amongst beginning band students then and still are today. He was considering tutelage on the guitar or trumpet when Francis Hellstein, principal horn of the Detroit Symphony, presented a guest performance at Julius's school. Julius made his decision upon hearing that performance. He said, "I like the sound. I don't know exactly why, and I still can't explain it satisfactorily, but I fell in love with the sound of the horn." He attended McMichael Junior High School from 1933 to 1936 and was a dedicated member of the school band. Although little is known of Julius's personal life during this time, it is known that the romance he shared with the instrument was quite robust. Each day, young Julius made a 15-minute walk from this house to his school with books in one hand and his horn case in the other. He said, "I was very small and the case was very heavy. I used to drag the case along the ground to and from school every day. I must have worn holes through a couple of them at least." As a music instructor, that would literally be music to my ears. Go practice. This daily routine continued for 3 years, and his performance ability grew at a tremendous speed as a result of daily practice and dedication. In 1936, after completing his junior high school education, Julius opted not to attend the neighborhood high school with many of his friends, and instead applied to and was accepted in the Cass Technical High School program in downtown Detroit. Cass Tech at that time was a place that offered more than just the average technical education. There you could study electronics or engineering, but you could also specialize in other areas such as music, art, law, medicine. All of those were options at Cass Tech. It was a specialty school for people with a wide variety of specialty areas, including music. Julius spent 2 years at Cass Tech and immersed himself in the college preparatory style of education. He took courses in harmony, music appreciation, piano, He sang in the chorus, he played in the orchestra, and ironically, he received French horn lessons from Francis Hellstein. Students were allowed to specialize in one area. However, basic core curriculum was required of all students. And Julius enjoyed much success academically and musically in his 2 years at Cass Tech. He earned good grades in the core curriculum and above average marks in the music classes. But despite his success, Julius was not satisfied with the direction in which studies were taking him. As a 16-year-old African-American horn player in the United States in 1930, his chances of earning a position in a symphony orchestra were effectively nil. The repertoire for the solo horn at that time was not nearly as diversified as it is today. And by the summer of 1937, Julius determined that his musical career path would be different from that of any other performer of his instrument up until that time. He said once, "I wanted to be a soloist." There's very little repertoire at that time in classical music for the solo horn, so I learned to jazz. By the summer of 1939, Watkins found himself in quite a conundrum. He was an immensely talented horn player in a city with strong jazz roots, but there were no models on which he could teach himself to play jazz on his horn. Nor were there parts for him to play if he desired to join a band of his own. So he taught himself. He did this by listening to recordings, lots of recordings, including people like saxophonist Chu Berry. Julius began his journey then towards jazz stardom. He began performing with a neighborhood band, and since no horn parts existed, he transposed trombone or saxophone parts. His friends commented that Julius could read any part in any key correctly the first time. It was remarkable, they said. He had something in his mind that just clicked in regard to anything musical. You could give him a trombone part, sure, an E-flat part, bass clef, treble clef, a different clef, it didn't matter. He could do it all. He knew about these relationships and knew everything about their parts. Later in 1939, Watkins toured with Ernie Field's band, and although Julius did take his horn on the tour, he found himself playing trumpet and was regulated to playing extra trumpet parts as necessary, while his horn remained in its case night after night. His eyes were opened to the realities of life on the road as a jazz musician, as the band toured across Texas and Oklahoma that year. Many of the jobs they performed were one-nighters. Those are concerts in a different town every night, a different bar, a different club, and the whole time Julius was stuck playing on an instrument other than his beloved horn. As you can imagine, he became quite frustrated and gradually admitted that he needed an outlet to vent those frustrations. He said, "When you're laying off in a strange place, you seek any outlet you can get. That usually turns out to be some form of dissipation, so sometimes there was that. And other times, I'd just lay in bed all night, practicing my horn until 7 o'clock in the morning." Watkins spent 3 years touring with Ernie Field's big band before returning to Detroit in 1942. His homecoming was uneventful, although his family must have been elated to see him and hear him tell about his musical journey. Julius desired to remain in Detroit for an unspecified amount of time and hoped to form dance bands with his old friends. But upon discovering that his musical contacts were no longer living in Detroit, Julius set his sights somewhere else, Denver, Colorado, of all places. And he moved there in 1942 with the hopes of playing his horn in a new group. He joined a 6-member band and played his horn on numerous occasions in Denver. Julius gradually became the group's leader, at least in his own eyes. He was content performing his horn in a congenial group. However, stressful relations within the ensemble eventually led to its disbanding. He said, "It was a young group, and the fellas got interested in girls and booze. They became lazy about rehearsals, and I am serious about rehearsals." The lack of dedication from the other band members frustrated Julius terribly, and in 1943, the group dissolved. Once again, Julius returned home to Detroit. The following 3 years were a mixture of personal and professional success for Julius Watkins. He fell in love and married his first wife, Ella, who gave birth to fraternal twins, Julie and Julius Jr., on December 6, 1943. The financial pressures of parenthood undoubtedly forced Julius to re-examine his career choice as a freelance traveling musician. He joined the U.S. Navy Reserve on May 20th, 1944, in an effort to serve his country, to be a devoted husband with a physical presence in the house, and to provide steady income for his family. After receiving his training at the United States Naval Training Center in Great Lakes, Michigan, now Seaman Second Class Watkins was assigned to the reserve station in Detroit. 2 Navy medals were awarded to Julius. However, his experience was short-lived due to unspecified medical issues, and Julius Watkins was discharged after just 3 months of service. Undeterred in the pursuit of his ultimate goal, Julius continued to practice his horn and play in occasional dance bands with the hope that a profitable career as a jazz artist would eventually materialize. He never lost sight of his dream. In the early months of 1946, fellow Detroiter Milt Jackson met Julius and asked him to join his big band. Watkins accepted, and in doing so, found himself suddenly transformed to the center of the jazz universe. Instantly, Julius and his horn were in great demand. Still, he wanted more. And in 1950, Julius Watkins set his sights on New York City. Julius relocated to the Upper West Side of Manhattan and established a residence on St. Nicholas Avenue. And on the 30th of August, 1950, he submitted this application to study at the Manhattan School of Music. His acceptance was based on 3 specific items of criteria. First, and most obviously, he was a talented horn player, whose foundation of musical knowledge and repertoire came from one of the most respected principal horn players in America. Second, he applied for and was accepted as a special student. This allowed him to pursue academic classes and training under the understanding that no degree would be conferred. Third, the Manhattan School of Music was one of 2 music schools in New York City, outside of the universities, qualified by the U.S. government to accept returned veterans under both the GI Bill of Rights and the Veterans Vocational Rehabilitation Law. So, studying at the Manhattan School, Julius found himself in a place with a lot of benefits. One of the most significant was the fact that students were not penalized for missing classes due to professional musical engagements. Julius took the Manhattan School of Music by storm and earned a 4.0 grade point average during the spring semester of 1951. He immersed himself in courses such as diction, sight singing, orchestration, music theory, music literature, and applied lessons with members of the New York Philharmonic. His classmates held Julius in such high regard at Manhattan that some even commented that he was a positive person, to the extent that he would always go out of his way to help someone else, even if they were pursuing a degree and he was not. He wanted to make everybody around him better, musically and personally. His studies at Manhattan School concluded in May of 1953, and he failed ultimately to maintain the same level of academic progress with which he began. But he was gaining great experience as a jazz soloist, his ultimate dream. He started playing in more and more clubs in New York, doing more and more commercial recording work, and his career was really starting to materialize. Unfortunately, it is speculated that the stresses of school and work led to the demise of his marriage to Ella. However, we do need more research on that to confirm reasons behind their separation and divorce, which occurred right around that same time. 1954 marked the beginning of a new phase in Watkins' life. It was in that year that he joined and toured with Pete Rugelow's band and also recorded with Thelonious Monk, 2 megastars in jazz history. Julius was quickly gaining a very positive reputation as a horn player amongst his peers and was in high demand as a sideman. As much as he enjoyed his newfound fame, Julius decided to pursue something else, to pursue a new type of chamber jazz which possessed the same intimacy found in more traditional classical ensembles. His lifelong goal of creating such a group was realized in July of that year with the formation of the Julius Watkins Sextet. The sextet featured Frank Foster on tenor saxophone, Perry Lopez on guitar, George Butcher on piano, Oscar Pettiford on bass, Kenny Clark on drums, and the ensemble's namesake on the French horn. The members had known each other from numerous jobs and experiences prior to the creation of that group. And they recorded 2 albums in very short succession. Great enthusiasm was generated as a result of awareness of the French horn as a jazz instrument throughout New York, throughout the northeastern United States, and across the country. After a brief run with the Julius Watkins Sextet, Watkins performed as a sideman with Oscar Pettiford's group. He adapted to the new sound of this group and was a perfect fit personally and musically with the ensemble. Another member of Pettiford's sextet was tenor saxophonist Charlie Rouse. Charlie was originally from Washington, D.C. and played clarinet before switching to tenor saxophone a few years before his engagement with Pettiford. Rouse and Watkins met frequently for coffee and realized that they both shared an unbridled enthusiasm over the possibility of a small jazz ensemble featuring a tenor saxophone and French horn on the front line. The two would frequently meet at Watkins' apartment and have informal jam sessions until the wee hours of the morning. Julius said, "We played very softly. There were no drums, no bass, nothing else. Just the two of us playing very fast and very soft. Our horns played so well together that Charlie and I began to talk about a group, and that duo did create a new ensemble called Les Modes, and later Les Jazz Modes." People were stunned to hear the sounds of the horn and tenor sax blending so beautifully. Rouse once said, "Most people associate a mysterioso sound quality, that far-away alpine horn sound, with a French horn." But that's just one of the sounds that Julius can get out of his instrument. His horn has all the virility and hard masculine quality of the trumpet and trombone. There's so much more in the French horn than the symphony orchestra players ever realized, and Julius is the person who made everyone aware of this. Let's take a moment now to hear Julius in a performance with the Julius Watkins Sextet in 1954, a sultry Latin tune called Linda Delia. Julius, take it away. The post-Jazz Modes years proved to be extremely beneficial for Julius, professionally and personally. In 1958, he recorded 12 albums as a sideman with Johnny Richards, Gil Evans, and Miles Davis. Work was steady, and Julius was still playing his horn, and jazz groups continued to call him to play as a lead person or as a sideman. He formed a relationship with Quincy Jones in 1959, a relationship which saw the creation of 7 albums over the course of 1 year, and a spot in the orchestra for a touring production of a new musical called Free and Easy. This tour would be one of the defining moments in Julius's life, and one which would ultimately initiate the chain of events that would lead to his death some 18 years later. Quincy Jones was asked to form a new band featuring the best players on every jazz instrument, including the horn, to perform in the musical selections for this touring production, Free and Easy. Jones immediately called the biggest names in the jazz recording industry and quickly formed what he referred to as the United Nations. Jones commented on the band in his book, Q, the autobiography of Quincy Jones, by saying, "It was the best damn band I ever had. 2 beautiful and gifted women, Melba Liston on trombone, Patty Bown on piano, trumpeters Ake Pearson, Billy Byers, Jimmy Cleveland, Clark Terry, and Quentin Jackson, Julius Phantom Watkins, the first ever great jazz French horn player, saxophonist Phil Woods, that you see on the far right, Jerome Richardson, and Bud Johnson. This was a super band," said Quincy Jones. Things appeared to be going well for the musical during their first performances in Paris. The plan was to perform in Paris for 12 weeks, then on to London, and then back to the States. But after 12 performances, the show was canceled due to poor attendance and bad reviews. The producers met with Quincy privately and informed him of this decision and told him to get the band to the airport at 7 a.m. the next day or risk being stuck in Paris. Quincy was so distraught he couldn't bear to inform the band of this news. When they showed up for the gig the next evening, Quincy finally told them. When he asked, "What do you want to do?" the band had one answer: "Let's go on tour!" And so they did. The band toured Europe for 10 months on a shoestring budget after producers canceled that run of Free and Easy. The bonds formed between members of the group were stronger than those found in most nuclear families. On the tour, musicians passed the time laughing, fighting, arguing, and drinking, and they also teased each other about their peculiarities. The tour, though, was not glamorous. Quincy Jones reported that, quote, "money was really tight, and sometimes the proprietors at our concert venues were broke also. So they paid us with pot, or as we called it, sweet wheat." Financial and living conditions were so deplorable on this tour that some band members renamed the tour Free and Sleazy. Let's take a pause here to experience Julius Watkins live in performance with the Free and Easy Orchestra. This was recorded in France in 1960, and Julius, take it away with Everybody's Blues. Range of 4.5 octaves. Julius could go almost 6 octaves. It's thought that there were wagers between the band members and Quincy Jones as to who could play the longest solo. Quincy comes in here in just a moment to try to get Julius to stop, and we'll see what happens. Here he comes. Keeps on going. If you look carefully, you'll see some little smirks on the faces of the other orchestra members. They knew what was going on. Finally, Quincy says, all right, that's enough. It's believed that Julius earned his nickname Phantom during this free and easy tour, and he received that nickname for numerous reasons. Tom Varner, one of the modern jazz French horn players today, elaborated on this by saying, quote, "People always thought it was because of his sound, like he could come in with this mysteriously soft high note," and we heard examples of that in this performance. But other times, it was because Julius would simply be the last one to show up for a gig and the first one to get out of the pit when the show was over. Other times, you'd be sitting there talking to him, having a conversation, you turn around and look back and he just got up and walked away. It's like, where did Julius go? He received the nickname for numerous reasons, and they were all valid. But it just goes to show just how eclectic he was as an artist and how many quirky personalities he had, just like you and me. After the Free and Easy tour, Julius returned to New York in 1961 and had a lot of success performing as a sideman, as a lead horn player in all sorts of different venues. He was in incredibly high demand, and not just in jazz. He was starting to get calls now for classical orchestra concerts. He was recording commercial music, TV, Broadway, jazz. But then something strange happened. He disappeared. Literally. 1967, nobody knew where he was. The calls for jobs started to decline. He stopped showing up. And then he was gone. It made a lot of people wonder, what happened to him? The Phantom. It wasn't until 1970, some 3 years after his disappearance, that the Phantom resurfaced. He showed up to a recording session wearing his hat, tie, and coat, carrying his horn case, and was found standing outside the venue by Warren Smith, a percussionist in New York City, who was also arriving for that same recording job. Warren asked Julius where he had been. He said, "I haven't seen you in years." Julius responded very quietly, "I've been sleeping on the trains every night. Just me and my horn." Warren was incredibly moved by this honesty from Julius and invited Julius into his apartment to live there and rehabilitate himself after a 3-year decline in health due primarily to alcohol consumption. So in 1970, the Phantom had a rebirth, a renaissance of sorts. And as he ventured into the last phase of his life, he did so with renewed hope, renewed enthusiasm, and renewed love. Many of these successes can be attributed to Warren Smith. A special someone that Julius came into contact with as a result of Warren Smith's matchmaking was Harriet Davison, one of the most vibrant and successful female African-American violinists of all time, let alone in her time there in the late 1960s and 70s. She was classically trained and was a concertmaster in numerous orchestras around New York City. She and Julius met and fell in love and were married soon thereafter in 1972. They moved to the small green house in Montclair, New Jersey, and started a new life for themselves. Both had been previously married, both had children from their previous marriages, and both were very lonely and drawn to each other as artists and as human beings. It was in this house in Montclair, New Jersey, where Julius began to share his knowledge of the jazz French horn with budding students at that time. You can see some of those students here. On the top left, Mark Taylor, a prolific jazz French horn player in Brooklyn. To the right, Vincent Chancey, arguably the greatest jazz French horn player since Julius Watkins. Tom Varner, a leading jazz artist, pedagogue, and clinician, now based in Seattle. And John Clark, who has a long legacy of solo albums and arrangements of very popular classical melodies arranged in jazz settings. These 4 individuals have played major roles in advancing knowledge of jazz French horn repertoire today and sharing the legacy of Julius Watkins with students under their own didactic trees. By 1977, after performing numerous engagements of the show Raisin, war against diabetes in Julius came to a head. Julius, always very proud and modest, tried to shield those around him from witnessing his internal struggle. Vincent Chancey said, "I remember a lesson one time at his house, he just started shaking. I mean, he was shaking really badly. He literally fell out of his chair. I tried to help him up, and he refused. He got up on his own. He struggled around the corner. He took a shot of his insulin and came back a few moments later without missing a beat, saying, 'Sorry about that. Now, where were we?' His health not only affected his reliability to play, it also affected his reliability to show up. Warren Smith said, 'I should tell you this, when Julius got too sick to play, the conductor and all of us liked Julius so much that we would actually cover for him.' The statement serves as testimony to the level at which Julius was respected and admired and loved by his peers. Those who worked so closely with Julius, those whose lives were touched by his angelic personality, were the very personalities willing to risk their career status and reputation to protect the dignity of a dying giant." On April 4th, 1977, Julius Watkins suffered a heart attack and died at St. Barnabas Hospital in Short Hills, New Jersey. At that time, he was survived by his 2 children, his father, his brother, and 2 sisters, and his beloved Harriet. Warren Smith remarked that Harriet took such good care of him, but when he began to fail, her nervous system broke down. She literally lost her hair worrying about him. I can't say these things are psychosomatic, but she eventually succumbed to something herself, some kind of debilitating disease that took her, but man, oh man, did she love him. Memorial services for Julius were held at the David Woody Memorial Home at 11 o'clock in the morning on April 8th, 1977. Following the service, Watkins' remains were transported back to Detroit, Michigan, and he was buried in the family plot at United Memorial Gardens, Garden of the Masonic, in Plymouth, Michigan. Julius Watkins was an unflappable man. His optimism and passion for his art caused him to achieve the status which he enjoyed as the leading performer of jazz French horn music, period. He was a man of honor and integrity who believed in that old school philosophy of conveying a positive impression regardless of any physical or mental turmoil occurring within. His witty personality and sense of humor would at times hysterically infuriate those with whom he worked. He was a man of complex peculiarities. He sought neither fame nor glory. He avoided the spotlight and rarely drew attention to himself. He loved jazz and the horn and quietly went about his life in an unassuming manner. He said, "It's not a profitable life, but I like it." He was loved by many with whom he worked and inspired countless others in his field to achieve greatness. And despite the disheartening events surrounding the final years of his existence, his career was arguably the most successful in the history of the jazz French horn genre. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share Julius' story with you today. I'd like to offer a special thank you to Nancy Scott and Dean Higginbottom for their support in this presentation, and also my sincere appreciation to our chair in the Department of Music, Terry Austin, for his unwavering support and friendship. I'd be happy now to entertain any questions that you might have at this time. Thanks again.